Usually when we talk about building something new from scratch, there's this distinct sense of relief in having a blank slate.
Yeah.
You pour the foundation, put up the walls, and you get to decide exactly what the building looks like.
Right, because the architect has, total freedom to execute their vision without any baggage.
Exactly. But then you look at the process of adapting a massive, globally beloved legacy property in the modern era, and suddenly you aren't building on an empty lot at all.
No, not even close.
You are trying to construct a modern skyscraper directly on top of a sacred, centuries-old historical landmark. Every single brick you move, every modern window you install, it's going to be scrutinized, debated, and just deeply felt by millions of people who've already lived inside that landmark in their minds.
That is a really perfect way to visualize it, because you aren't just dealing with the mechanics of storytelling or set design anymore. You're dealing with the emotional real estate of the audience. And when you factor in the intensely polarized cultural climate we live in today, the architectural blueprint becomes, infinitely more complex. You have to honor the foundation while updating the plumbing for a modern audience, all while people are watching your every single move.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at a massive stack of research and analysis that you, the listener, have sent our way, all centered around the upcoming HBO Harry Potter television series.
It's a huge topic.
It is, and honestly, the way you've mapped this out is just brilliant. We're going to explore this incredibly complex web you've untangled for us, looking at the early casting buzz, the intense behind-the-scenes friction, and the really fascinating narrative challenge of how a modern adaptation might struggle to portray the darker, grittier nuances of its most complicated characters.
It's basically a perfect storm of pop culture and off-screen drama.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's an essential conversation to have right now. Adapting legacy intellectual property today requires navigating an absolute minefield. On one side, you have deeply entrenched fandom lore.
People who know every single word of the books.
Right, exactly. And on the other, you have modern socio-political scrutiny. The materials you sent us do a remarkably thorough job of highlighting exactly where those two massive forces are about to collide head-on.
So let's start with the concrete stuff, the people who are actually going to be on the screen. Looking at your research, there is a really positive reaction to the casting of Nicholas Hoult as Gilderoy Lockhart.
Oh, absolutely.
And I have to say, thinking about his past work, it makes total sense. He's this incredibly versatile, genre-hopping actor.
He really is.
Yeah.
And Lockhart is actually a very difficult tightrope to walk as an actor.
Yeah.
You have to possess a specific brand of charming, glittering charisma that successfully fools the people around you in universe, while simultaneously projecting a completely hollow narcissism that the audience instantly recognizes as fraudulent.
Yes.
Hoult is practically tailor-made for that dynamic.
Totally. When a production gets a casting choice right like that, it signals to the audience that they understand the fundamental DNA of the character. But of course, your research quickly pivots to a casting choice that is generating a massive amount of debate.
The Snape casting.
Right. Yeah. Specifically, the potential casting of a black actor as Severus Snape, which is referred to throughout this analysis as the Black Snape debate. Now, while most of the casting looks genuinely great to fans based on the notes, this specific choice is viewed as a major point of contention that is going to have significant ripple effects.
Okay, let's unpack this. If an actor is incredibly talented and can capture the essence of a character, why does a demographic shift in casting ignite such a massive, immediate firestorm?
What's fascinating here is how the landscape of modern franchise reboots has entirely shifted. Casting is no longer simply a question of acting ability, screen presence, or chemistry.
Right. Those used to be the only things that mattered. Exactly. But in today's climate, casting instantly becomes a cultural flashpoint. We have to view this objectively, taking a cue from the notes here, regardless of the actor's phenomenal talent. Casting a historically white character with a black actor in an environment this culturally charged means the performance will be viewed through a highly politicized lens before a single episode is even filmed.
Yeah, because it stops being just about the story and starts becoming a proxy for broader cultural arguments.
Precisely. The analysis you provided predicts that this specific casting choice will be heavily scrutinized by every corner of the internet. Some will view it as a necessary modernization, others as a betrayal of the original text, but very few will just view it simply as an actor playing a role. It casts a long, incredibly heavy shadow over the production,
putting immense pressure on whoever takes that part.
Huge pressure.
But that shadow doesn't just cover the actors on the screen. The intense scrutiny is heavy enough But this production is carrying a completely different kind of baggage that has nothing to do with who is reading the lines. The real battlefield is happening behind the camera.
Oh, the behind-the-scenes stuff is intense.
Which takes us into the controversies surrounding the original author, J.K. Rowling, specifically regarding her very public views and the accusations of transphobia. This is creating an intense pressure cooker for the entire industry.
And we're seeing real industry fallout happening in real time. For example, your research mentions that directors who have worked on highly acclaimed massive shows like Loki, specifically Kate Herron and Black Mirror, have reportedly rejected or walked away from the project.
Wow.
And there is a direct line being drawn in the notes between this hesitation to join the creative team and the controversies surrounding the author.
Yeah, though it's worth noting, the research you sent actually takes a fairly cynical view of those specific departures.
It does, yeah.
At one point, it refers to Herron leaving as a blessing in disguise due to creative differences she reportedly had behind the scenes on Loki. So it might not be purely ideological. But the research also points out a really interesting paradox with the actors themselves.
Right, the Petunia Dursley casting.
Exactly. The actress cast as Petunia Dursley apparently made public statements condemning J.K. Rowling's, and I'm quoting the notes here, abhorrent takes, but she still accepted the role. The analysis summarizes this dynamic pretty bluntly, suggesting she's just cashing that paycheck.
It highlights a profound contradiction that many creatives are facing right now. You have actors and directors who vehemently want to distance themselves from the creator's personal politics, yet the cultural and financial gravity of the property is so immense.
It's career-defining.
Exactly, so career-defining that they still participate in the project. It's a collision of personal ethics and career reality.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here for a second. You brought up this idea in the research of a decade-long PR gauntlet, predicting that the press tours are going to be absolute gold for drama. The notes even call it a shit show.
Yeah, a complete media circus.
But is that really realistic? Here's where it gets really interesting. How does a production maintain any creative momentum when they are running a 10-year PR gauntlet? Audiences have incredibly short memories. We cycle through outrage so fast. Are reporters at the season 6 premiere, 7 years from now, really going to be asking the cast about tweets from years ago?
That's a fair challenge, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the economy of modern media. When reporters have exactly 90 seconds on a red carpet with an actor, they are incentivized to ask the question that will generate the most viral engagement.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Yeah. Asking about an actor's emotional preparation for a scene might get a polite answer. Asking them to weigh in on a highly controversial cultural figure guarantees headlines, clicks, and engagement.
So it's not even necessarily about the fans' outrage. It's about the media ecosystem feeding on the friction.
Precisely. The argument here in the materials is that the actual quality of the television show risks taking a backseat to the controversy surrounding it. It becomes a secondary topic at its own premiere. And the real kicker is that J.K. Rowling likely won't even be at these red carpet events.
Right, she's completely absent.
Leaving the cast and the showrunners to endlessly answer for her for the next 7 to 10 years, it's an exhausting prospect for a production team just trying to make a fantasy show.
It feels like the narrative off-screen threatens to completely swallow the narrative on-screen.
Yeah.
And speaking of the off-screen friction, your research also touches on the broader idea of boycotting the property altogether.
The boycott discussion in the notes is fascinating.
It is. And I have to mention, there's a very specific sarcastic joke in the analysis you provided. The idea presented is that maybe the reason boycotts against the property are failing is because the word boycott itself is too inherently gendered and offensive for modern sensibilities.
Yeah, it's a very pointed aside.
But it really underscores the underlying belief in the notes that these organized cultural efforts to sink the property just aren't working.
Yes, that sarcasm is used to highlight a broader skepticism about the efficacy of internet-led boycotts against monolithic properties. But what your research does next is crucial. It transitions from the real-world PR optics directly back into the narrative optics. Because the cultural climate doesn't just affect what happens on the red carpet, it deeply affects the actual writing of the script inside the writer's room.
And this is where we get into the unvarnished truth of Severus Snape, which might be my favorite part of the research you sent over, because you've highlighted a really specific optical hurdle.
And it's a big one.
If the show casts a black actor as Snape, how does that change the visceral reality of his backstory? Especially in later seasons, like The Half-Blood Prince. In the book, Snape is relentlessly bullied, publicly humiliated, and ganged up on by James Potter and his friends.
The concern raised here is highly visual and deeply uncomfortable. Having a young black boy bullied by a group of privileged kids on screen in that specific, relentless manner carries a vastly different, much heavier historical and cultural weight in today's media landscape than it did when the books were written.
It really does.
It transforms a story about high school rivalry into something that looks and feels like targeted systemic abuse.
And because of that fear of controversy, there's a deep concern in the notes that modern writers will feel an inherent need to sanitize the character. They worry the showrunners will actively avoid showing a minority character doing the genuinely nasty, cruel, and abusive things that Severus Snape actually does in the original text.
Which brings us to the whole book versus movie Snape dilemma.
Exactly.
It is a critical distinction that often gets lost in pop culture memory. The original film adaptations, aided significantly by Alan Rickman's undeniably incredible, deeply charismatic performance, drastically softened Snape.
They really did.
The movies presented a version of the character who, by the end, seems like a fundamentally heroic, tragic guy who is just gruffly protecting his cover the whole time.
Right. But the reality of the books is entirely different. Book Snape isn't just misunderstood. He's incredibly complicated, he's petty, he's vindictive, and the research literally just calls him an asshole.
Yeah, that's exactly what he is in the text.
His sole motivation in the story is not some deep underlying love or affection for Harry. It is entirely about his obsessive, unrequited love for Harry's mother, Lily. He actually actively despises Harry.
He hates him. Because Harry looks exactly like his childhood tormentor, James Potter, with the sole exception of having Lily's eyes. The duality of that character is his defining trait. His entire life is dedicated to protecting the son of the woman he loved, while simultaneously despising the son of the man he hated. He is not a nice person. He's deeply flawed and often cruel to his own students.
And the comparison you provided, using the famous Patronus scene, perfectly illustrates how the movies completely changed this dynamic. Okay, in the movie, it's this incredibly emotional, sweeping, cinematic moment. Dumbledore asks if Snape has finally come to care for the boy after all this time, and Snape doesn't say a word. He just silently casts his Patronus, the silver doe, matching Lily's.
It's beautiful, it's tragic, it implies a softening of his heart.
It makes you cry.
But the stark, raw difference in the original text is jarring. In the book, when Dumbledore suggests Snape might actually care for Harry, Snape is practically offended by the accusation.
Really?
Yes. He explicitly snaps back for him in total disbelief and disgust, and then he casts the doe.
Wait, really? For him? Let me be sure I'm getting this. That completely changes the context of the magic.
It changes everything. It proves his enduring apathy, even his hatred for Harry as an individual. It reinforces that his absolute single-minded devotion is to Lily alone. The doe isn't about protecting Harry. The doe is about his eternal grief for her.
So what does this all mean? It sounds to me like the original films put a bit of a heroic, soft-focus Instagram filter on Snape to make him more palatable to a blockbuster audience.
That's a great way to put it.
But the books show this raw, gritty, completely unedited photo of a deeply flawed, bitter man who does the right thing for a highly obsessive reason. The central question you've brought to us is, will HBO have the nerve to show that unedited photo, knowing the cultural friction it might cause if the character is played by a minority actor?
That is the core narrative challenge validated by this research. Adapting Snape faithfully is an exercise in extreme restraint and frustration for a writer. It requires writing a character who is actively unpleasant, who is torn between love for a dead woman and active hostility for her living son, without trying to give him a redemption arc that makes him conventionally likable.
Which is tough for modern TV.
Very tough. And the implication in the notes is that modern Hollywood struggles immensely to allow minority characters to be that genuinely unlikable and flawed on screen without trying to course-correct the optics to protect the actor and the network from backlash.
It's like they want the diversity on the casting sheet, but they are terrified of the messy, complicated humanity that actually makes the character interesting in the first place.
Exactly.
But even with all of this, the PR gauntlets, the intense casting debates, the narrative optical hurdles of a modernized script, the findings make one thing absolutely undeniably clear. We are looking at an IP juggernaut. It's an unstoppable force. It's like a runaway train. Critics can yell at it from the platform, but it's not slowing down.
It really isn't. Despite the massive cultural friction we've just spent all this time discussing, the data confidently predicts that the television show will be the biggest thing ever released. They argue that it will not flop, regardless of controversies or the Snape casting debate.
Yeah, the inertia of the franchise just outpaces everything else.
It has rooted itself too deeply into the generational consciousness.
The research even brings up the announcement of the Hogwarts Legacy 2 video game as literal proof of life. It essentially points out that organized boycotts against this property are failing to put any real dent in its financial success.
Right. The first game broke records, and the sequel is primed to do the exact same thing.
It's massive across every medium. Even the audiobooks get a really interesting shout-out in the materials you sent. There's genuine praise for Riz Ahmed narrating, noting that while it took a minute to get used to his unique voice in that world, he delivered a genuinely great performance towards the end.
Yeah, that was a cool detail to include.
And there's a special mention of Hugh Laurie acting as Dumbledore, calling his portrayal incredible.
Yes, and the materials include a very interesting cultural aside regarding Hugh Laurie's Dumbledore. The research describes his performance as based, and then immediately follows up with a joke about how the word based has evolved online to essentially just mean agreeing with 99% of the population.
Which is pretty funny when you think about it.
It's a small linguistic observation, but it reflects a hyper-awareness of internet culture. Language shifts so quickly in these online fandom spaces, and what used to be niche slang for counterculture resilience has just become a synonym for mainstream approval.
Which perfectly encapsulates the franchise itself, right? It started as this unique, novel thing, and is now just the mainstream baseline for fantasy. It really is everywhere. You can debate the ethics of the creator, you can argue over the casting on message boards, you can dissect the red carpet interviews, but it's like a runaway train. It's moving forward across TV, video games, audiobooks, everything.
This raises an important question, one that is central to the incredible research you provided. When you look at the separation of art and artist, and you factor in the sheer, unprecedented scale of a beloved intellectual property, at what point does a franchise become practically immune to modern boycotts?
That's a great point.
The data suggests that this specific universe has reached a critical mass where its cultural footprint is simply larger than any real-world controversy attached to it.
It's wild to think about. We've covered so much ground today. We started with the genuine excitement over Nicholas Hoult finding the perfect tightrope walk role as Lockhart. Then we waded into the treacherous, highly politicized PR waters of modern Hollywood, looking at how the media economy and off-screen drama threatened to overshadow the actual craft of filmmaking.
We covered a lot.
We really did. We went deep into the psychology of Severus Snape, looking at the gritty, unsanitized reality of the books and the genuine narrative fears of smoothing out his edges for modern optics. And finally, we looked at the unstoppable momentum of a franchise that just keeps expanding despite every roadblock thrown in its path. And I want to remind you, the listener, that our goal today was to pull back the layers of your research and extract the really fascinating insights about what happens when legacy storytelling collides with modern cultural friction.
It is a delicate balance, and the research provided a very clear, fascinating lens into that friction. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on everything we've discussed today.
Let's hear it.
When a fictional universe becomes a multi-generational monolith when it spans decades, crosses every imaginable medium, and is sustained by millions of intensely devoted fans, does it eventually stop belonging to its creator entirely? And as new generations of writers, actors, and directors attempt to remake these stories, do these modern adaptations become less about honoring the original text and more about serving as a mirror, reflecting our own society's current struggles, anxieties, and values?
It's a heavy question. Are we just building on top of that historical landmark? Or are we slowly replacing it entirely, brick by brick, to look more like the complicated world right outside our window? Something to think about. Until next time, keep digging into the research, keep asking the hard questions, and thanks for taking the deep dive with us.